this is at the time of the launch of a joint workshop between the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine and the Cobb National Medical Association Health Institute, entitled "An American Crisis: The Growing Absence of Black Men in Medicine and Science." I'm Cato Lorenzen. I was chair of the workshop. We have 3 other panelists today who will be speaking and providing comments, and then we hope to be able to open this briefing up for questions, answers, and also comments from individuals in the audience. To my left, to my immediate left, is Dr. Victor Zhao, who is the president of the National Academy of Medicine. Next, we have Dr. Randall Morgan, who is executive director of the Cobb-NMA Health Institute. And then to my far left, we have Dr. Vivian Pinn, who was senior scientist emerita at the Folk International Center at NIH and the former director of women's health of the National Institutes of Health. I'd also like to say that 3 of us here are past leaders of the National Medical Association, past speakers of the House of the National Medical Association, and Dr. Randall Morgan and Dr. Vivian Pinn are past presidents of the National Medical Association. So welcome to you all. I'd like to call upon Dr. Zhao to provide some opening comments.
Good morning, and thank all of you for attending this briefing on a really very important topic: the growing absence of black men in medicine and science, an American crisis. First, I want to thank the Congressional Black Caucus for hosting this briefing. And of course, I see my good friend, Congressman G.K. Butterfield. Thank you for being here.
And your congressman.
And my congressman, too. Thank you. Cato has been really showing tremendous leadership in taking this challenge on, along with all of us. And so I do want to really thank him. And but I also want to express my personal commitment to addressing this topic. This is a very important issue for national academies. So first, as you all know, the low participation rate of African American males in medicine is an alarming trend that threatens the quality of our health system, hampers progress in improving health for all challenges, equity, and justice. You know, a diverse workforce has been identified as an important component of quality and competent healthcare system. Research indicates that patients who receive care from providers of similar race and speak the same language are more satisfied with their healthcare visits and tend to have better adherence to their medical treatments. Research also suggests that physicians from underrepresented racial and ethnic backgrounds are significantly more likely to practice primary care than their counterparts, and to serve particularly in medically underserved areas. Dr. Lou Sullivan, that all of you know, in 2003 wrote in a report, Missing Persons, Minorities in Health Professions. He highlighted the urgency of this issue. And he said, the report says, the fact that nations' health professions have not kept pace with changing demographics may be even a greater cause of disparities in health access and outcomes than the persistent lack of health insurance. That's an amazing statement. Today, physicians, nurses, and dentists have too little resemblance to the diverse population they serve, leaving many Americans feeling excluded by a system that seems distant and uncaring. He went on to say, in future years, our health professionals will have even less resemblance to the general population if minority enrollment in schools of medicine, dentistry, and nursing continues to decline, and if health profession education remains inherently unequal and increasingly isolated from the demographic realities of mainstream America. Failure to reverse these trends would place the health of at least 1/3 of our nation's citizens at risk. So we know that there's been progress, some gains over the last few decades. African Americans, Latinos, and Native Americans, however, still represent are underrepresented in health professions with respect to the U.S. population. Together, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, American Indians make up more than 25% of U.S. population, but only 9% of nation's nurses, 6% of physicians, 5% of dentists. Similar disparities show up, in fact, in many faculties of many other health professional schools. But of particular concern we're here today is the low number of black males. Black men continue to be a minority of minorities in medicine. Medical school application and matriculation numbers have failed to surpass the number of 35 years ago. This worrisome trend is especially alarming in light of the fact that African American men have the lowest life expectancy and the highest death rates compared to men and women in other racial, ethnic, and gender groups in the United States. So why is this? I believe the problem is rooted, as been articulated by Cato and many others, in our societal inequities, in education, employment, economics, discrimination, and other factors. In fact, 2017 perspective published in National Academy of Medicine, Cato wrote that, and I quote him, U.S. health disparities for African American men are rooted in the history of slavery. Although these days are over, the legacy of segregation, the relatively recent civil rights movement, and their interconnectedness with health disparities lives on today. Given the significant inequalities in health, education, and employment opportunities, the effect of an unjust criminal justice system, the black male is at particular disadvantage. End quote. So this is truly an American crisis, and no doubt about this. And the step towards addressing this is, in fact, starts right here. But actually started many years ago and caused ongoing effort. But in December 2017 at the National Academies, we held a two-day workshop co-sponsored by the NMA Health Institute and the National Academy of Science and Medicine, led by Cato. This workshop had a chance to review, and you're going to hear more about this, past and current history of black men in medicine and science, and the challenges encountered in transition points to become successful physicians and scientists. This also explore innovative strategies to support entry and successful passage through education and career transition points, and consider the role of government, education, systems, philanthropy, industry, and others in affecting change, and explore ways in which innovative strategies can be shared. The workshop, as you hear from Cato, put forward, and from my colleagues, put forward many innovative strategies. I will not go in any detail. Suffice to say, social determinants of health, institutional racism need to be addressed, making diversity a priority in medical schools and nursing schools, mentoring and pipeline programs, and importantly, identifying priorities to develop strategy that can address all of the above. So the workshop is a call to action, and we're here to tell you about the findings of that workshop. And this is why I'm so pleased today that we have a hearing at the CBC, because the members of CBC, whom I have great respect for, are positioned to make a difference. And so I look forward to having a dialogue with all of you and explore solutions. And personally, I'm totally committed to work with you to stem this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Victor. First of all, I want to take a moment and personally thank you, Victor, for your work with the workshop. We actually had to raise over $250,000 to be able to put the workshop on, and this was done by the Cobb Institute and by others. Victor Zhao was very, very helpful in bringing the funds and bringing the commitment of the National Academy of Medicine personally to make this happen. He not only said this is a priority for the National Academy of Medicine, I think he backed it up by providing funds to help with the workshop. So, Victor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the workshop in general, give a little bit of the background, and talk about some of the data that we have that's behind our contention that this is an American crisis. Again, we believe there's a crisis involving black men in medicine, but we know that this has been something that people have been talking about for a number of years. If you follow along, there is a handout of some slides that I've had. We can't present slides, but just a handout of some materials that I've put together to talk about this. But there are a number of different magazines, a number of different news stories that talk about the fact that the black male is becoming endangered in medicine, that the appreciation that there appears to be low numbers of physicians that are being trained right now and who are black males. We had a paper that was published in the Journal of Racial and Ethnic Health Disparities in 2017 entitled An American Crisis, The Lack of Black Men in Medicine, which talked about and examined some of the data that was present in the area. These data come from a number of sources, but mainly from the AAMC and their diversity in medical education data that has facts and figures each year looking at diversity in medical education. The information also came from a AAMC circular entitled Altering the Course, Black Males in Medicine, which also talked about the dearth of black men in medicine. We were very, very happy to see that the National Academy took up this area and published our paper in the Journal of Racial and Ethnic Health Disparities. We published it as a discussion paper at the National Academy of Science website, which appears in the National Academy website. And we presented data which demonstrated that over the 35-year period, this is a very interesting period because it's a period in which blacks were first starting to come to medical schools in larger numbers. But if we look at that 35-year period, we've really made no progress in terms of black males in medicine. Now, also, one has to remember that we have had a historic expansion of medical schools in the country over the last 10 years with a number of new medical schools that have been started. So the fact that we've not moved forward in many ways, we've moved backwards in terms of numbers of black men. It's especially important to note. If we examine the percentages of black men versus black women, it's about only about 37% of blacks in going to medical school, starting medical school each year are black men. This is also already with a number that we think is low for black women. It really demonstrates that. And so it is black men, as we've said, continue to be a minority of medicine. Now, there's a table that is in your handout from the AAMC examining the numbers of first-time applicants and acceptances in U.S. medical schools by race and ethnicity. And I'm not going to go through all of the different parts of the graph, but I'd like you to pay attention to the second page, in which I've circled a couple of areas of note. And that's if you look at African American first-time applicants and we identify those that are African American males who are actually born in the U.S. who self-identify as being born in the United States. Only 16% of first-time black African American applicants are African American males born in the United States. Only 16%. So and if one examines all black matriculation in terms of those that are identified as African American males born in the U.S. in terms of starting, only 20%, or 19.29%, 20% are born in the U.S. And so we see also, in particular, this group of individuals who are U.S.-born African Americans are being particularly hard hit in terms of their representation. We contend that the absence of black males in medical schools represents an American crisis that threatens efforts to effectively address healthcare disparities. And of course, we know that diversity and excellence are intertwined, and so this threatens excellence in terms of clinical care. We're very proud, again, that this workshop proceedings has been released. It was just released now. It's on the National Academy website and can be downloaded for free, entitled An American Crisis, The Growing Absence of Black Men in Medicine. And really, I think that let me just say, I think that the workshop really represented a call to arms for individuals to address the need for African American men in medicine. And the workshop really focused on thinking about ideas and in terms of this call for action. This is a joint workshop, as I said, between the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine and the W. Cobb-NMA Health Institute, which is an institute that is really dedicated to addressing and eliminating health disparities. The workshop agenda is actually in the briefing and the pre-publication book and also in online. And again, the workshop objective was to facilitate dialogue and stimulate action. And first, we reviewed the past and current history of Black men in medicine and sciences, and looked at and examined the challenges that were encountered in all the different transition points along the way. The second area was again exploring innovative strategies to support entry and successful passage through educational and career transition points. And as an example of this, we were told of the African American Male Mentoring Roundtable. It's a roundtable at Ohio State University where African American men, physicians, medical students are brought together in a mentoring role every month to be able to provide encouragement and support. And then we also consider the role that government, education systems, philanthropy, industry, and others can work and affect and change. And there's a lot of information that we received that gave us a cause for thinking about what can be done. For instance, if one examines, we often hear about the issues of the pipeline, and we have to go back to K-12 or preschool and to be able to make changes. But if we even examine right now those students, those black students who are actually at the point where they're applying, 2 out of every 3 black students who apply to medical school do not gain admission. Now they've gone through the entire process of going to college, getting the pre-medical courses, getting their qualifications to be able to apply, but 2 out of 3 do not gain admission. In fact, it's the lowest percentage of any other group. And so we feel, in terms of as an idea, that examining ways in which that group of individuals can gain higher amounts of admissions through working with medical schools, through working with government, these are areas and ideas that we think have promise. And again, the final is to explore ways that these innovative strategies can be shared with others, spread, and scaled up. And one example is that we've created a new society called the Regenerative Engineering Society, which is a society that's actually focused not only on just in terms of scientists, but also focused on K-12 ways to be able to get young people involved in science in a very, very early age, especially young individuals who are black and brown, to get involved in terms of science at an early age, and really thinking innovatively about new ideas to be able to make that occur. So these are some of the concepts that came this is the framework in terms of the issues that are seen. This is in general what the workshop was about. And now I'd like Dr. Randall Morgan to talk more about the workshop and to talk about the sessions and what went on.
This informative session, which we hope will stimulate a considerable amount of discussion and thought. As I thought about this particular effort to address the absence of black men in medicine and science, I could not help but to reflect of approximately 53 years ago when I came to Washington as a first-year medical student at Howard University, and my professor was Dr. W. Cobb. And so the factors that I think led to my success are illustrative of some of the things that we've lost over the last 50 years and that we must regain, as well as increasing other types of innovations that are much more timely. I was a third-generation college graduate in an African-American family. There were presence of black physicians, pharmacists, and educators in my community in Gary, Indiana. I had mentors of all ages that looked like me. I had a history of academic success from K through 12, and so did my family, of course. There was a considerable study cohort of successful classmates who helped to mentor and stimulate me throughout my school career. I actually took advantage, as many of us from the 50s and the 60s, took advantage of de facto segregation in the schools during the formative years. They were the best teachers, the best parents. Our communities were very supportive. STEM education with excellent faculty was available even before the term was appreciated. And finally, significant family support. And as we went through our workshop, many of our presentations indicated that there was a significant absence of some of those 8 factors. And we have as our obligation, I think, to replace support in those areas, and will begin to make a difference in terms of reversing this trend. The workshop is a result of an 18-month collaboration between the National Academy of Medicine and the W. Montague Cobb-NMA Health Institute to provide an in-depth analysis of the problem, which has been recognized for over 20 years by all who are involved in medical education and leadership in the United States. In spite of the recognition that there's been a shortage in the seats in medical schools to increase the population of physicians and surgeons in the United States, who all are challenged to serve a growing and diverse population in our nation, the number of African American medical students has had very little growth, and the number of African American males who are medical students has been decreasing and is now the number reflected in 1978, and not far from the number reflected in 1965. With steady growth of the population and the need to increase the percentage of physicians who are underrepresented minorities to reflect the presence and growth of number of persons living in America who represent those segments of our population, the numbers of those admitted to medical school continue to fall short of all goals and all projections. We have, however, been alarmed at the decreasing absolute numbers of African American males who are in training to become physicians and recognize the many consequences of this reality. This workshop, therefore, represents a collaborative effort of all who have a personal and even emotional concern about the plight of African American males in all segments of our American society today. However, the organizers and the participants in this workshop clearly recognize the severity of the problem stated and the lack of success in the reversal of present trends of severe underrepresentation of African American males, as well as African American females who are trained to deliver the high level of medical care that is expected by our citizens today. The participants who are sponsors, organizers, speakers, moderators, and discussions, as well as the experts who attended this workshop, represent the cream of the crop of organized medicine in the United States and in the world. We do not need to convene another group of experts to declare that we have a growing deficit in our workforce of physicians of color in our nation, exemplified by critically low numbers of African American male physicians and surgeons. It is in the nation's best interest that we report to the legislative branch of our government in general, and specifically to the members of the Congressional Black Caucus, that we have studied this problem in great depth and are ready for multi-level action endeavors to solve this problem. However, the problem cannot be solved without your assistance and without your guidance. So with that prelude, I will look briefly at the first part of a 2-day comprehensive workshop, which states the problem, and then Dr. Penn will speak to the solutions which were discussed on the second day of this conference. And I think that will set the stage for our discussion as we go forward. So as Dr. Lorenzen said, in the first panel after our keynotes, Dr. Lewis Sullivan also provided a keynote, as did Dr. Darrell Kirsch, and of course, Dr. Zhao had his in absentia presented, so we're happy that he's here today in person to make this presentation. The idea was to look at life trajectory, looking at where these young men come from in their communities and what their makeup is as they begin to be entering the education cycle. And once they are in the education cycle, what are the barriers that are keeping them from being successful in science and being interested and admitted to medical school? And then subsequently, even when they are in medical school, how can we guarantee that there is going to be completion of the medical school curriculum, graduation? And now a major problem that we're finding is many of our graduates in the United States medical schools are not matching for residency training at the conclusion of their medical school. So that's essentially 12 years of training that is sort of undervalued if one is not able to become trained in specialty care. So this is a very complicated problem, and I'm just going to give you a few of the highlights with regard to life trajectory. These are just some comments made from some of our astute panelists, just for purposes of, I think, stimulating discussion. So let's just look at 3 of these panels. The first, black men along the life barriers and challenges for black men along life's trajectory. Racism is a fundamental cause for the low priority of addressing the underrepresentation of black men in medicine. By examining how racism is operating with regard to the shortage of black men in medicine, it is possible to identify mechanisms that can be targeted for intervention to increase representation of black men in medicine. Addressing the lack of black men in medicine requires acknowledging and improving the social environment and other environmental factors around black men and black boys. And I think Dr. Mitchell, who just came in, made those comments for us. Early access and exposure to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, education, mentoring, all have a mirror of relevance and can promote positive self-image among young black men. This was a theme that was repeated over and over and over again. Mentoring and strengthening the social support networks and addressing perceived discrimination can help black boys and men to overcome psychological barriers to becoming physicians. And the lack of black men is a problem. The lack of black men in medicine is a serious problem and requires an urgent solution. As we look along the educational trajectory, the highlights were as follows. The lack of educational and financial resources and the lack of competence or negative self-perception and low self-efficacy are primary barriers to achieving medical careers among black boys and men. Community colleges are an underused resource. These schools have students that can be used to build the pool of black men and students of color in medicine and can serve as a hub for community collaboration to strengthen the medical education pipeline and to support students in the pipeline. We feel that was a very innovative recommendation because many of our students simply need additional work prior to beginning the STEM education program on the undergraduate level in order to be successful in being admitted to medical school. Medical education pipeline programs need to appeal to students' interests, and medical education programs need to start extremely early, particularly in elementary school and in middle school. A great deal of discussion was made around the fact that black men are underrepresented in all areas of academia, not just in medicine. So medicine is simply an example, but in natural sciences and biomedical sciences and engineering and all of the sciences, black men are not represented to the level that they should be. And the Cobb Institute has a special interest in the pipeline of researchers because we understand that NIH research funds are not being given to underrepresented minority investigators in nearly the rate that is being provided for majority investigators. That's another sidebar that we have to solve, and we hope that many of the next generation of researchers will be, as Dr. Lorenzen, an MD, PhD researcher who has had a broad career in all different areas of science and is, of course, a super mentor. Addressing the shortage of black men in medicine will require partnerships that require a broad range of stakeholders. And I think, again, this is a message that will be discussed today through our discussions, including not just talk, but cultivating a culture of financial stability and sustainability for financing medical education, because clearly the financial barriers are many. Current innovative exploratory strategies to support entry into science and medicine for black men. I think we've spoken about some, but focusing solely on low-income students may miss capturing black students of higher socioeconomic positions who still underperform and are still underrepresented relative to peers of other racial and ethnic backgrounds, especially when compared with white peers. Undergraduate students who are low-hanging fruit on whom pipeline intervention should focus in the near terms over the next few years are extremely important, because this pool of students could become competitive in the health professions admission with relatively little support and additional preparation. Now, this recommendation comes from one of our presidents of university very close to Washington, D.C., who's had extraordinary success in developing researchers and PhDs, and feels that the pool of students and their intellectual capacity is the same. And many of those students can be redirected into medicine on the undergraduate level so that they have both careers, but that they are much more likely to be successful. So finally, on the reflections of the first day of the meeting, it was clear that the shortage of black men in medicine is not an intractable problem, but it is hard because institutional racism is a fundamental barrier. Political advocacy and action are needed to address the culture of schools where structures of institutional racism disadvantage students at an early age and have lifelong effects. A national clearinghouse of pipeline programs that can offer those interested in implementing programs a resource to identify effective programs with attributes that match their community and its needs, connections to the individuals running these programs, and support for program and design are extremely important. So with that, I will conclude my remarks, and
Thank you. Thank you, Caucus and members of the Congressional Black Caucus for being here today. We have a number of members who are present today, and I'd like to acknowledge those individuals. We have Representative Scott from Virginia. Thank you very much. Representative Lee from California, Representative Butterfield from North Carolina, and Representative Eddie Bernice Johnson from Texas. Thank you so much for being here today. Next, I'd like to ask Dr. Vivian Pinn to provide her comments. Dr. Pinn has been someone who has really been at the forefront of this discussion for many years. I remember back in the 1900s.
Been around a long time.
When I was at the National Medical Association and Dr. Pinn was president of the National Medical Association, I remember her talking about this issue, and this was a few years ago, but talking about this issue and really talking about the fact that if we really don't act and do something about this, that this will get worse. And she, was prophetic in her words, and so it's great, it's wonderful to have her here to talk about, give her perspective, and lead the discussion about what we do in terms of next steps.
Thank you, Cato. And actually, I was president of NMA 30 years ago, and while I have over 25-year formal history of dealing with women's health and women's career issues, and a longer history than that, than being focused on those, I did see the importance of the lack of black men in medicine back in 1988, and it was one of my presidential priorities, and here we are 30 years later, but finally giving it the national attention that it deserves. I want to comment on my comments in that I'm going to be presenting to you many, really summarizing some of what you've already heard and bringing some other points to you, but they're really more the significant points of the discussions. It is the policy of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine that we not in their reports or these kind of studies establish recommendations about, but we certainly are able to come up with ideas for strategies and where we should go. So I'm going to be presenting to you the points that I have pulled from the report and from the discussions that we had that we feel are important to consider for where we need to go to address this issue. And as Cato has stressed, and I'm so pleased that he did, is that this is not a new problem, and it has been increasing in severity over the years. And it is long past the time that we raise the national consciousness about this issue, and perhaps by raising the national consciousness, we can bring more attention and perhaps implementation of some initiatives that will help us to alleviate this issue. I want to just add, and I'm sure be introduced later, but if, Randall has already referred to Dr. Roger Mitchell, who is the Chief Medical Examiner of DC, who participated in this workshop. And you will see he gave some very poignant comments related to black males who don't have the background that Randall Morgan spoke to, where he had the role models and had the support to encourage him to go into medicine. And Roger, and that's where that language came up about what did you call the mirror of relevance, which I think is a term we should keep in mind about future initiatives. And also, I have to acknowledge the current president of the NMA. You might have acknowledged her before I came in, since I was late, but Dr. Doris Brown, who is the current president of the National Medical Association, who is there. Really, there are so many components, and this is obviously a multifactorial issue. And therefore, we need so many components to work together in an integrative and team-like approach to overcoming some of the issues that have led to this continuing decline, not just decline, but continuing decline in black males in medicine. And that means also our educational continuum, our economic and social justice programs, including financial aid, philanthropy, government programs, self-worth consciousness, if you will, educational guidance, as well as personal counseling and mentoring to overcome some of the barriers that our black men are facing. One of the ideas that came out of many discussions was the need for the cultivation of comprehensive wrap-around programs that can address the socioeconomic and socio-emotional, that was the term that came out of the workshop, which I thought was a good one, the socio-emotional circumstances around black boys and men from childhood through graduate education, and that it's important to have those wrap-around programs to address the multifactorial issues that deter many of them from not just going to medical school, but from being successful in whatever they might choose to be. And as well, and also, of course, strengthening the medical education pipeline, which does require not only new programs or strengthening programs that exist, but also analyzing and realizing from programs that have existed in the past, especially some of our government programs, which ones have actually worked. And that's where the investment should go for the future, rather than just repeating programs that have not been proven to be successful. That leadership is crucial for health professional schools to address this crisis, and also to acknowledge non-education related costs. We talk about the cost of medical education, but we forget many of these young men, just as young women, have families to support, family issues to take care of, and so they have to live and they have to eat, and there are non-educational related costs, all of which figure into the financial barriers in medical education. And again, looking for and bringing about broader partnerships beyond the traditional ones worth exploring. And there were a few that were suggested that I'm going to mention to you, and you might have some idea about how we might bring some of these about. Dr. Morgan referred to the trajectory, and there were some targets for interventions that were identified that could address the trajectory. One is having shorter and more flexible pipelines. There are a number of post-bac programs and then pre-med programs, but we really need to take a look at the ones that are effective and make sure they are addressing the populations that need that help, and especially making sure they're thinking about the issues we have with bringing more black men, black boys, black men into the pipeline, and hopefully they will be encouraged as they realize the situation we're in to do that and make that special outreach. Also to make sure that somehow, and with working with the AAMC, I think that this will hopefully be re-emphasized, making sure that medical school admissions committees are considering the needs when they make their decisions. Some strategies that were suggested to support individual students in navigating the medical education pipeline were, again, looking at those pipeline programs that have been in effect and have been shown to be effective, but also identifying and recruiting new and more students, reaching out beyond where we are. Those students we're losing, those young black boys, obviously boys and girls of all races, but especially looking at that population of young black boys that get lost, and make sure that there's an enhancement of advising and mentorship for these underrepresented minority students with an emphasis on black men, making sure not to pit black men and against black women or blacks in general against other populations. What we're looking for is to continue to increase our women and sustain their levels, but we certainly also want to then increase and bring our males and bring them up to levels where they are, at least if we don't, I don't know about using the term parity, but where at least we see black males entering in levels that are relative to their population, to their existence in our population. But we don't want to make this a men versus women issue, and that I think we all agree on. Now, some of the kinds of things about reaching out for new initiatives or new partnerships. You know, many of our young black boys think about athletics, and they participate in sports programs after school or during school, and they see that. And we heard about a number of programs where those who are coaching athletic teams of young boys in elementary and high school are also exposing them to the sciences and encouraging them to consider careers in medicine or careers in STEM. And it seems to me that that could be maybe a really wonderful type of program to encourage be developed more widely. And then someone suggested, well, you're talking about those in sports. What about young men who are engaged in other things like arts or music or drama? And so just because they're interested in other areas doesn't mean they can't also be interested in sciences and in medicine. So if we think about some comprehensive approaches and using new approaches, that this could be a way to perhaps attract some of our young black boys who may not be thinking about careers in medicine, but realize that even in sports, they can be in sports, but they can go into careers in science. Trying not to go too long, but let's see. A mirror of relevance, I've already referred to, Roger, that was a good term, and I think we're all going to be using that more and more. But also, there was a thought and a discussion about how do we best disrupt the school to prison pipeline that we see affect too many of our young black men, and how can we identify the youth who are experiencing social, emotional, and behavioral problems and connect them to appropriate services. And this was thought to be an important consideration for today's society. And expanding those programs that prevent the loss. I think Cato referred to reclaiming. We want to reclaim those who may have started out thinking about a career in medicine but get lost or don't get accepted, that we don't lose them. We have a way to reach out to bring them back in, provide the support or educational enhancement they need so they can be successful applicants. And I must say from my programs back in the 70s, a number of students that people wanted to give up on, with a little bit of help, they went on to become superstars. So I know that can happen, and we should encourage that. To sort of bring this to conclusion, there's so many other things I could point out, but I think this gives you some points for thought. One other thing, One other thing for talking about special programs, some of you, there were a number of programs that were presented in the workshop, and you'll see it in the report, where there was specific funding or specific projects for black males. One that has particularly impressed me and that was presented by Hill from Jefferson is the Boulay-sponsored scholarship for black males. Evidently, the founders, I'm not a member of the Boulay, I'm not a man, but anyway, but the Boulay was actually founded by two of the earliest black graduates of Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. And because of that, somehow, in wanting to increase the number of black males at that medical school, the Boulay there set up a special scholarship fund to fund black male medical students at that medical school, with a particular emphasis on the fact that the founders of the Boulay were there. Seeing, and that gets into some of the points of what you can do in limiting funds and all, but to me there were several other programs that were cited that you'll find in the report, but to me that was very striking. But to sort of summarize, my own, and this is where I'm putting my own opinion in, but fortunately it was expressed over and over throughout the discussions. If you're going to bring about change, you've got to have leadership and emphasis from the top down to increase diversity. Leadership can make a call to action and can integrate equity and representation, diversity and inclusion in the mission of their institutions or their programs. And it has really been key to the successful increase of representation of underrepresented minorities where it does exist and where it can exist in the future. One quote was that leaders have to be deliberate and intentional about diversifying their workforce. That was a continual emphasis. It was questioned how schools can leverage existing leadership for accountability and connections between actual and expected performance, asking how do we take ownership for becoming institutionally effective for our student success, and how to be held accountable to that. You know, when you lead an institution or you lead an organization, you know that if you set parameters that those under you are expected to meet, you are in a better position to make sure they do. And if you see this as a priority, making that as a priority can perhaps help to make this a valid and an actionable item for those you're working for. And I say that as we think about that in addressing pre-medical institutions, community programs, as well as medical institutions. Obviously, you need to address the financial burdens as well as advocacy and looking at not just the educational costs, but the extra educational costs. And finally, there was a lot of emphasis on programs at the HBCUs, and the Dean of Howard's Medical School is here, and I'm sure he's going to make some comments to you, and a lot of idea and discussion about programs that are associated with or could be associated with our HBCUs. But I think that we all recognize that this is not an issue just for HBCUs. They can help us, but it is an issue where should be the responsibility for all of our medical and health profession schools, so that the programs and responsibility for correcting this crisis is not limited or placed simply on the shoulders of our HBCUs. And finally, I have to say that I'm very proud that the National Academy of Medicine and Dr. Sal took this on. Cato's urging, Cato knows how to twist arms, but with Cato's urging, it is extremely important after 30 years of seeing this as an issue of great importance that it has received the attention of the National Academy of Medicine. Was released on its website this morning. It is out, and it cannot help but bring attention and help us to move forward in eradicating this.
First of all, we need a whole of government response to this because it is so serious. And I remember my grandfather passed away at 88 years old in the 60s, and I helped take care of him. And then we were looking at African American men as it relates to health care and medicine. And we haven't, as you all have laid out, moved too far. We've actually gone backwards in many respects. But what I want to say is, one is, in terms of political advocacy, just know, and I think all of you know, that all of the healthcare programs right now, as it relates to the Office of Minority Health and all of the funding at the federal government level, is on the chopping block. So we need you to really weigh in right now to just maintain the level of meager funding that we've had And we're trying, of course, and want to increase that funding. But secondly, we have 48 members of the Congressional Black Caucus on key committees. And I think, and we have some phenomenal staff who are here. And my suggestion would be that we have a workshop up here on Capitol Hill with staff and members and look at what we can do from each of our key committees in terms of your recommendations. Because if we don't do that, we're going to continue to come as policymakers and hear this wonderful information and recommendations, and yet we won't have that connection. And so just as an appropriator, I mean, I'm willing, I've heard some things today that I'm going to work on before we mark up the bill, but I just think it would make sense. Congresswoman Robin Kelly chairs our Health Brain Trust, and she's doing a phenomenal job. And for me, it makes sense if we could just get together this year immediately and look at some of these recommendations and pull together a whole of government response based on what we can do as legislators.
Yeah, let me just illuminate on what Barbara Lee just said a moment ago and just carry it a step further. There's no issue more important to the Congressional Black Caucus than what we're talking about right now. We get it. And the four of us sitting in front of you are on the front line dealing with this every day, and we need your help. We need to partner with you. Bobby Scott, for example, is the top Democrat on the Education and Workforce Committee, plus he's an SOP, son of a physician. He's an SOP, yeah, okay. I'm an SOD, son of a dentist, but anyway, he's on a very crucial role where he can help with the issue. Barbara Lee spends $1.3 trillion a year as an appropriator here in the Congress of the United States in discretionary money. We need Barbara Lee. And this lady is the top Democrat, Eddie Bernice Johnson, on the Science and Technology, Science and Space and Technology Committee. She's a registered nurse, medical background, by profession. This is her passion. She's done it for 25 years since she's been here. I'm the only CBC member on the Health Subcommittee of Energy and Commerce Committee. I'm a senior member of that committee. And so we are ready, willing, and able, but you've got to tell us specifically what we collectively can do to move the needle, rather than just having a conversation. You guys live with this every day. We need to move the needle. You say 2 out of 3 of your students, of your applicants don't get accepted to medical school. I never heard that data before. Is it justified or unjustified? That's my question. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you what my answer is. We did an analysis of the grades and scores of the black students that are applying to medical school. And they're the same grades and scores from 10 years ago that white students are getting into school. But now over time, those grades and scores may not be strong enough. But there's a whole group of black students that are having grades and scores that are actually the same as the white students who are getting in, but they're not getting in. So we've got a number of different, and there are a number of reasons behind that we can talk about. But this is an area that needs to be evaluated. This is an area where the leadership of Congress can
That's where we can begin.
even in terms of examining what criteria are important for medical school. I was a former dean of the medical school at the University of Connecticut. We had a dean's council meeting, and there was a discussion where the person said, we don't look at diversity in terms of it because it's not part of what our ranking is from U.S. News and World Report. Well, we have to change that and address that.
What about retention? Are we losing the kids once they get into medical school?
We also are having issues in retention, and there are ways that we can do that. We have the National Medical Association and the W. Montague Cobb-NMA Health Institute can create an action plan that can work with the Congressional Black Caucus to look at what the next steps would be. We've already had discussions about this working together. I think that's an important step. The other important step is that the National Academy, I believe, need a permanent committee on this, on blacks in medicine and science and engineering. Right now, there's a women's committee on blacks, on women's committee on science. And in fact, they were the only group to put something on during Black History Month, was the Women's Committee, because there's no presence in terms of a committee that's dedicated to examining these issues in the National Academies. And so we need a presence, and we need a committee that's actually dedicated to these issues and to not only create recommendations, but also create action plans that can be then brought back to Congress to be able to be put in place.
I'd like to
Representative Scott.
Well, let me ask you a question so you can comment. Somebody mentioned residency as a barrier. And Dr. Morgan, can you recite those numbers, how many doctors or percentages there were in the 60s and 70s compared to now?
Well, right now we have approximately 3.5% of practicing physicians are African American, and about 7% of medical students are African American. And those numbers are not very different from what they were in the 60s. But what is happening now is that many of the students that are graduating from medical school with significant debt are finding that they're not able to carry on their training as residents. And so this is something that's been recognized, and this is because they're not competing well enough and being approved for or selected as residents.
Can I add another comment? One of the issues we're seeing that I hear about a lot from seemingly many black males, but from students in general, is the competition for first-year residency postgraduate positions. While there's been an increase in the number of students completing medical school, there has not been an equal increase in the number of first-year positions for training. And with our students from our schools competing with students finishing offshore and other medical schools, there's a competition for those first-year slots. And I don't have the numbers, but just from personal contacts and hearing, many of those students who are finishing, needing to go into residency programs, are looking for a year to work, or a year to do research, or a year to get them through until they can get into a position. So that is another issue that we have to consider in terms of residency training, just finishing medical school, being able to get into postgraduate training so they can become licensed.
If I may?
Yes, please.
I think the issue of looking at scores
Yes.
is insufficient.
I agree.
In fact, the scores are outdated. They measure a number of whatever you call it, performance, competencies, and actually it should be much broader, looking at cultural sensitivity, many other issues. So that itself needs to be revised, and that's of course, it's on us to do that. I quite agree with Cato. We have a Committee on Women in Science. In fact, you chaired Engineering Medicine. We should really think about creating something like this, and certainly you have my ear on this. I think that there are many fundamental issues that certainly you guys can be very helpful to us, but I think the community needs to do a lot more. My congressman will know that in Durham, for example, with the public school, we actually are able to say health profession is important, so created a lobby school called City Medicine Academy, which actually draws a lot of minority students because it's lottery, and it actually focuses on health professions, not only in doctor, but also other health professions, because you can start really early to see the kind of role model that you can access.
That's the way STEM does it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the way Silicon Valley does it.
And you know the work that I've been doing on looking at giving work experience. So at Duke, we have created a lot of internships for, in fact, public school students made in Durham, right? I think we need to do a lot on our side in the community. But what you can do for us from a national legislative possibility is going to be very helpful to us.
Thank you. Gotta run. Sorry. 7 votes.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to give an opportunity to Dean Miney, the Dean of the Howard University School of Medicine, to have some, if he has any comments that would you like to?
Sure. Thank you, panel. I'll try to fill in some of the holes. You've covered the issues very well, so I'll try to round out some of those just across the board. The competition for medical schools remains extremely strong. We start with 9,000 applicants who send in to get accepted each year. We whittle that down to about 5,000. And then at the end of the day, we can interview probably 300 at a time allowed to fill a class of 120. Some of the interesting things that sort of dovetails into that first, 2 out of 3 of the applicants do not get in. In part, that's because there are only so many slots that we could possibly provide. So we interviewed quite a number of applicants. This year we offered 57 acceptances for black males. We offered about 75 to females. The ratio of females to males is now 2 to 1. So we had twice as many women applying as males applying, and we try to be very balanced. The other thing that we do is we reach into the lower, if you would, third of our applicant pool to get accepted. We were looking for balance. We maintain that balance. So you 75% of the people who are admitted to Howard, for example, are in that lower third of scores. So we don't just look at the scores. We do look at the scores, but only about 15% come from the upper tier with our final class. So we do look at the scores, and we do try to address the mission of doing that. So one, we can't accept every student, and there's not enough HBCUs to accept every student. So we need other colleges to step up, and we haven't talked about that much, but there has to be other colleges who step up. Howard graduates, and I'm just using Howard as an example because it's quicker to go that way. Howard graduates more PhDs of minorities in this country than anyone else. We graduate excellent kids from college in general. They go on to go to other schools, but if you think about we screened to 500 African American males, we interviewed 140. The others were qualified in some other way. So they're potential candidates who can go elsewhere to be accepted to other schools. We have to be able to promote that issue, which is there are candidates, but if you use only the numbers, then they won't get a chance to be seen by other schools. So we have to call upon the rest of the colleges or medical schools around the country to be participant in what we do. We do have a very diverse class. We accept students from other HBCUs. We accepted students from the Ivies. And so we have a diverse class, and we try to maintain that diverse class. So that's one of the things. Pipelines. We have 7 pipeline programs. Many of them are short. They're 1-year summer programs that range from kids in high school to kids who are actually just matriculated into the College of Medicine to try to help them to be successful. We have 3 long-term programs that we have to run. One is a middle school for STEM, called MS2. So we have an entire middle school program on the campus that's designed to keep people in that pipeline. In our upper tier for MCATs and college scores, we have a BSMD program. So there are kids who come in, they go to 2 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and that's probably our most successful cohort of kids. We only take about 10 to 11 kids in that program. But again, it is a pipeline in that they are focused from the moment they enter, and we're focused on them of going all the way through to the end. So we do have that. This past year, last year and this year, we have a thing we are calling Bison STEM program. Same concept. It's mostly geared in and around Washington, D.C., but we're accepting exceptional kids, gearing them towards the sciences, not necessarily towards medicine. We have about 31 kids in there, but about 50% of those want to do MD, PhD programs. So we do have pipelines. Again, there are only so many pipelines. We take over 250 kids in the summer alone, trying to keep them through pipelines for summer programs. We can only do so much. So again, part of the support that I see that's needed is a broader expanse of taking the experience that Howard's and other HBCUs may have and disseminate them among other colleges to try to make them reach. We can't do it all alone. That's just a fact.
Thank you. Some comments?
If I may ask you a question, I mean, given what you told us, there's a good pool of qualified candidates you cannot take.
Correct.
And I'm going to assume that that happens elsewhere too. What happened to this pool? Is there some systematic mechanism to help them actually move forward? And
We don't really have a systematic mechanism. In other words, if you had a systematic mechanism, you have a pool of candidates whom you would interview in us, and then you can make recommendations to, let's say, consortium schools, right?
Yeah.
To say we have qualified candidates, we cannot take them all, but we consider them qualified, we want to recommend them to you in case you want to fill out your list. We lose probably our top scored students. When I say score, so the students who score really high on MCATs, they get picked off by the Ivies. We are a good farm system that we send them to other places, which is fine because we want that to happen. But then there's a whole pool of kids who absolutely qualify to go into schools that don't get looked at because by the time they get into that pool, the door closes rapidly. 120 is not a lot at the end of the day. So we lose some of those. if I could make one last comment that goes back to what Dr. Pim said, was debt and costs. Howard's one of the lowest cost private schools in the country. I think we're probably at the bottom or one from the bottom. Many of our students who are coming in already carry debt in. So that's on top of what they do. Because of the cohort that we take, again, 95% of our students are going to graduate, period. Given the cohort that we take, that's not what you would predict, right? Because we're taking them in the lower third. We give them a lot of support, and we have a lot of systems in place to support them to get to the graduation level. Now comes the hitch. When you get to the end, we graduate them so they're qualified to go on. Last year, I think nationally, there were between 600 and 700 senior graduates from all medical schools who did not get residency slots, period. So these folks don't have a job. And when you get to the end of 4 years, you really don't have a job. If you're not an MD that's in a residency program, it's nice to have the degree, but you don't have a job. But what you do have is $250,000 to $300,000 worth of debt that has to be paid off. That is a problem, and it's a problem because we have not increased the number of slots available through, you know, the training programs that are funded. So we have way more students now by increasing the number of medical schools, the number of allopathic medical schools. We have way more students trying to get into residency. And if you don't get a residency program, you're sort of dead end. Even if you're waiting out a year, next year the number didn't decrease. The number of seniors coming out are still more than they were the year before. So you're not improving your chances by sitting out a year. So that is a real problem that we have to face on the national level, is we can get students in, but even the ones we get in, if you're not getting a residency program, you're not getting anywhere. So thank
So
you.
let's do this. I'm going to, in 1 minute, I'm going to call upon Dr. Doris Brown, the President of the National Medical Association, for any of her comments. I think that, Mark, do you have any comment?
I just had one comment, in that I think that there needs to be a national strategy in terms of the number of medical schools which we have now, which, as I understand, is about 140, 145.
We're over 150.
Right, and so there were 88 when I was a student at Howard. And the pure numbers of students of color, and African Americans in particular, is not that much different than it was in the 60s. And so we had Project 3000 by 2000 when I was NMA president in 1997, and we've never gotten to 2000, much less 3000. And I looked at the numbers over the last 35 years. It's a flat line. There's no improvement. Yet, we have schools that are being developed, medical schools that are being developed, particularly a lot in the South, particularly in my home state now, Florida, where this medical schools are developed with the idea that this is going to provide physicians for patients who don't have physicians, with the assumption that these physicians are pretty much all going to go into primary care. And so therefore, it is somewhat easier to get a residency in primary care than it is in some of the specialties. But we're finding, I'm an orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Lorenzon's an orthopedic surgeon. Our communities are hurting because we don't have specialists of color to take care of patients. And some of those numbers are decreasing every year as our retirements begin to increase. So I think not only are they not getting residencies, but they're not getting residencies in some of the specialties that are going to enhance the life of the communities. And so I think this is a national problem that needs to be addressed.
Convince medical schools for the need to have diverse student bodies. And the justification that was used was that if you bring in more minority students, they will go back to serve minority communities. And my concern then and now is how you interpret what our communities are. I think there's a need for us in academic medicine, there's a need for us in specialties, and there's definitely a need for us in primary care to serve the underserved areas. But unfortunately, I have even had someone say to me, someone applied to medical school and was a great student, but he was interested in doing research and therefore was not going to be going back to his community, so we didn't take him, and was very proud of that because of how they interpreted what our communities are. So we really have to disabuse that notion that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, the only other comment I have about that is that it's interesting in that we see this big expansion in the numbers of medical schools. Many of them are actually talk about diversity as part of the reason why they want the expansion, but some of these medical schools have the lowest
That's right.
diversity as new medical schools, and so that's again another area that can be addressed.
And looking at
Yeah.
faculty, that helps to bring on, I mean, there are many factors that could be looked at, the data to help with.
Dr. Brown, do you like to make any comments? Dr. Brown is the president of the National Medical Association. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, and thank you for this report. Certainly agreeing with the comments that have been made. I think what we need to come up with is a new strategy for looking at what happens once you graduate from medical school. Because when you tell me 600 students from all medical schools don't match, they are out a year, I don't know, getting into some kind of creative program, that means the next year the number's going to be even higher. And so these individuals then have to come up with some other mechanism to try to pay that $300,000 debt. We still have the communities that are underserved and remain because we have a maldistribution and certainly a number of specialties or specialty areas that do not have a number of providers in those areas, and so that's a critical problem. But I think as we think about a consortium of schools that can work together to try and get individuals through that pipeline to go on, so when you interview them and they're qualified but you don't have enough slots, that perhaps they can then go on. But I think we have to, the system that is currently set up, you graduate from medical school, you have match day, you go into a program and you do the clinical years, then you either go into academia, research, or clinical practice. But let us start to think of some innovative, transformative way of still fulfilling it, because once you get out of the rotation, it's hard to get back in, and we don't have any alternatives to address that area. And I think as providers, we need to think about that, and it gives the medical profession, medical associations, an opportunity to be on the forefront rather than waiting until industry or some other area comes in and decides that they're going to provide that for us, and then we complain. As we know, many hospitals are also closing, so there's not enough facilities to train those individuals. So where do they go and how do we look at it? And I think that's one of the areas, and not to leave out our legislative bodies of trying to address the major cut in budget for our institutions, and so again for programs. And so if we don't look at this as a collaborative approach, we won't be able to answer this in the future.
I think it's a very important point. I think we've talked about two things that we may want to look at, and how do we capture this group, this two-thirds group that doesn't get admitted, many of them highly qualified. How do we capture that group to be able to continue to mentor, and also this group, and how do we also capture the group that is that in terms of residency training, and making sure that they're on track. And also, how do we create structures to be able to look at this? I'd like to call on Dr. Roger Mitchell, who participated in the workshop and had some very insightful comments during the workshop, to provide some comments now, if you have any.
No, and I appreciate it, and I'm hearing and seeing what exactly you're talking about, as well as this kind of low-hanging fruit of individuals that are already qualified, and ensuring that these already qualified individuals have access points. I would tend, because we have staffers in the room, and some of the staffers and some of your members may be dealing with things that are not directly related to healthcare. And you may be sitting here and saying, well, how can my member engage in a way that kind of impacts this? And I would offer that the road to medicine is a protective factor towards delinquency. And that those of us that engage in the road in STEM at a young age have a higher potential of not being either victims of violence or perpetrators of violence. And so areas in equity, in education, in criminal justice reform also has the ability to direct individuals towards STEM and towards medicine as a solution towards criminal justice or entrance into the prison pipeline is also important. And that happens at the grade school, high school levels. It happens at the reading level of young boys and men of color. And so I know that that becomes more of a daunting, more complex concept to ingest towards increasing black men in medicine, but I'm a testament to that, right? And so my father was crack cocaine addicted. I had examples of medicine in my family, and my grandfather from the 1930s as being one of the black physicians in the country at that time. And so it was an alternative to other things, seeing myself as a physician. And so the more we can develop that relevancy in medicine, and that you can be yourself, be relevant in your community, but be a physician, and be a physician, not but be a physician, I think is extremely important. So there's opportunities in other legislative spaces to make a connection between this pipeline of black men in medicine, in addition to what we've talked about as it relates to individuals that already have self-selected or been selected to be physicians or wanting to be physicians. There are young people that don't even know they're physicians yet, that are 9, 10 years old, that if you give them that opportunity, they will take it.
That's a great comment. There's a saying, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And so providing opportunities for young people to have that road, to start on that road, they may move in other directions. That's one of the things we talked about in terms of creating a society for young people in terms of this area. Victor, then I think also Dr. Pinn.
And we know this is a systemic issue that involves everywhere from criminal justice, addressing racism, etc. So I think the task is very large indeed. But I want to share some anecdotes with you. I was at Duke, and we had a dean, Brenda Armstrong. She's just phenomenal. Many of you probably know her. What she'll do every year at the time of, application, where she'll go to many public schools, an effort to reach out to any and many of minority students. Inspirational. So we have bragged, and I come back to this issue at Duke, that we went from a segregated school to a school in which 50% of our students are minority, in which 25 are, African Americans. So that's a pretty good number. So I used to brag to my colleagues. I said, well, that's what we have. And my colleagues will say, in other schools, well, there's no whole pipeline. Based on what I'm hearing today, I think really a national effort should be developed to find a qualified pool of individuals that make it easily accessible to help them being evaluated by schools, and that we should call for medical school, have people like Brenda Armstrong, whose job is to go out there and recruit students. If you look at a national effort having that pool of students available, even as you apply or pre-apply, and having every school being committed to doing that, you're going to end up with a lot more people being admitted than I think a lot of them probably have fell between the cracks. Second thing I want to raise is the pipeline programs. I mean, there should be an escalation of larger number of pipeline programs, and that's another national effort. But also, pipeline programs are not coordinated very well, so there's not enough database. You don't know, what is how do you measure, how do you learn from each other. We certainly have learned in National Academy. Vivian will tell you that we have these community efforts called Knowledge Hub. We did that in clinician burnout, which you actually share information, learn the best practice. And I think you ought to create something like that, right? As a place where all pipeline programs learn from each other, how do you work, what's the best way, and collectively work towards this. So those are my 2 points. One is it's on a systemic effort that we need to make to have the qualified candidates being placed. And secondly, an ability to look at the pipeline program in a more systematic fashion.
Just a quick comment on that. So the 4 HBCUs that have medical schools have an annual symposium that we meet and promote our pipeline programs. So Drew, Morehouse, Meharry, and Howard already do that. Again, we can only reach this many, and you really want to reach a much larger number. So,
But what I'm reading is there's really not systematic database. There's not a standard way of collecting that information.
That's right, yeah.
There's not a way of learning from each other. So that's easy to do. I mean, easy in the sense that that's within our ability to say, let's create something like this.
But this is Valerie Montgomery Rice, the president of Morehouse Medical School, has been advocating this, to create a website, a national clearinghouse for this, and I think it's a great. Dr. Penn, do you have any other comments?
I just was thinking, especially with the comment about budgets being cut back, and thinking back to the 70s and 80s when we began to really expand programs, there were two things that really made a difference in increasing the numbers of women and men of color who entered medical school. One was the tremendous amount of funding that the HCOP programs had then under Clay Simpson, who ran them, and I think there's hardly anyone my generation or who had a program for increasing minorities in the 70s or 80s who can't tell you that most of their graduates came in because of the HCOP funding, which allowed them to recruit, to give them summer programs, to fund their research and other things to help them increase the numbers coming into medical school and going further in their careers. And the funding for that office has declined over time, and it's not as significant as it once was. The other thing is that for many students who had problems with or who were concerned about financial obligations and looking at the lack of healthcare providers in certain areas, the National Health Service Corps and the other programs that provided funding or payback or provided funding for medical education, or some of the loan repayment programs, and NIH can't give loan repayments to everybody, but those are valuable programs in helping to allow those in medicine to be able to choose their area or to get placed without the huge financial burden. And there are many who hated going in through military medicine or the National Health Service Corps who ended up finding where they were placed were wonderful places and ended up staying there to practice and having wonderful careers. I think, especially Dr. Brown, I know is working on statements from the NMA, but as we think about where we go in terms of government participation to see what can be done on a national level to help address health disparities in this country by providing, again, funding for the kinds of programs that really were proven to make a difference in the past, and we've now got a 20, 30, almost 40-year history of what the results of those were. So we might keep that in mind as we think about where we're going to raise, especially at a time when so many budget cuts are coming, to place priority on some programs that either need to be expanded or reinstated. And I just want to thank those of you who stayed with us. I was pleased to see so many of the members who actually came, and I know each of them have just been great in their efforts, and the fact that they were here today means so much. And I want to just thank you. I know Cato, as our panel chair, will do it, but I want to thank you for your attention. I know you have lots of things that come your way, but I also know from many years in government that it's the staff who make a difference in making sure things get taken care of. So I know how important it is that we have your attention.
Yes, Dr. Brown.
Just more so of a commercial, because at the convention for the National Medical Association, our Physique Symposium, we'll be addressing mentoring and pipeline. And so, Dr. Zhao, I think we're sending you a letter to ask your participation. Yes, and that's August in Orlando, Florida, so we welcome having participants there, 11 through 15.
That was a commercial.
Yes, that's what I said, it was a commercial.
So we've got maybe about a minute or two left in terms of it. First of all, I want to thank all the congressional staffers who are here. How many congressional staffers do we have here? Thank you so much for being here. If there's a burning question from one of the congressional staffers, this is a time, and if there are any questions to provide, I'm going to ask that the panelists actually remain afterwards for discussion with congressional staffers or others afterwards. Again, this is the launch of the workshop proceedings. This is I guess it was a 3.5-year effort in terms of being able to bring this on. It's so great to see it's there. The interesting thing about the National Academies and these workshop proceedings is that you can buy the book for $50, or you can get
download it for free.
you can get the entire book for free by downloading it. And it's like, is this a trick question?
Yes.
And so yes, it's downloadable for free at the National Academies Press. We also have posters from the workshop that are available. You can receive the posters on your way out. I do need to give some special thanks to a number of different groups who were involved. First of all, the Connecticut Black and Puerto Rican Caucus stepped up about 3.5 years ago when we first said that we wanted to fund something like this. They provided the initial seed funding to move this area forward. This would have not been possible without their help, and I want to send a special thanks to the leadership of the the Connecticut Black and Puerto Rican Caucus for providing funding. We also, in addition to the National Academy of Medicine, we received funding from the Aetna Foundation, from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We also received funding from the Kavli Foundation. Obviously, the WMIU Cobb-NMA Health Institute is a joint workshop, and they provided substantial funding. The National Institutes of Health has also been funded and also has talked about working with us in terms of follow-on programs. And so if I've missed any of the others, and of course, the Boroughs Welcome Fund, which was actually one of the first to provide anchor funding for us in terms of moving forward. So I want to thank all the foundations that participated in funding providing the funding over $250,000 in terms of funding the workshop and program and some of the programs that we have. I'd like to also thank Renee Gathers, who has been working tirelessly with me over the time. Renee knows that I tend to push in terms of moving programs forward, but my heart's in the right place and her heart's in the right place, and I do extremely appreciate all the work that you've been doing to make this all happen and make it work out. So I want to take the time also to thank our panelists. Victor, you've been, again, a great champion for this, and you've really, there's a phrase from the group Migos, you walk it like you talk it. And so I want to thank you in terms of that. Randall Morgan, I've known for a number of years. We've been partners here with the WMIU Cobb-NMA Health Institute, and was there in the beginning and worked on this from the beginning. And it's great to see it all work out. And Dr. Pinn, who's been an inspirational figure to me. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done in this area. And I want to thank you. We'll be around for afterwards for any questions. But thank you very much for participating in this briefing.
Thank you.